Hi there, welcome to episode 5 of Flute Fix. This is a series of videos where I answer your questions about the flute. If you'd like to ask a question, please do get in touch via Facebook or Instagram or via my website. So all those details will be in the description box below. Thank you to everybody who has sent in questions already. Today we have 3 questions based on technical challenges found in the flute repertoire. So we have things from octave leaps in Pachelbel's canon all the way through to negotiating the 5th variation of Schubert's Trocknerblumen variations. Question 1 comes from Astrid, and she'd like some tips on doing octave leaps, especially going down from C sharp down to low C sharp and C natural going to low C natural. Going from a C down to a low C or C sharp down to a low C sharp is tricky for a number of reasons. Firstly, the fingers, coordinating, going from a note that has hardly any fingers down to a note that has practically all of them down. So there's that to consider, and not smacking your fingers down and affecting the balance of your flute. So that's one thing. The other thing is having to quickly adjust your air stream angle, so the direction that you're blowing at, and also the speed of your air. So to make it easier, let's just break down that interval and practice it slurred. When you have to tongue it, we have the added difficulty of coordinating the tongue with the airstream and the fingers. So let's start slurred and in smaller intervals. So if we go from a C and just chromatically, like Moy's sonority, okay, so that's slow with real attention to the sound, gradually bringing the jaw further back as we go for the lower notes there. So the smaller intervals, there's hardly any adjustment required, but as the interval gets wider, we need to make sure we're blowing down more for that lower note, especially when the dynamics are the same for both notes. Okay, so if we just make that a little bit faster. Now let's just practice that octave, but this time we'll do it as a harmonic, so we don't have to worry about the fingers. So let's just practice going between the higher C to the low C. Make sure that you're not tightening here or pressing too hard. Keep that nice and free so the jaw can move. Now real fingers. And then just add the tongue to that. So gradually just get faster there. And lastly, if that octave leap is coming from a strong note to a weaker note, so if it's on the beat and then it's off the beat, we need to be a bit louder on the top one. But if you're coming from a pickup note, the top note needs to be softer and then the lower one louder. So the air direction would be up, down. So strong to weak, down, up. Question 2 comes from Louise, and she would like some tips on how to do nice, expressive and fluid runs, particularly in reference to the Doppler Hungarian Pastoral Fantasy. There are of course a lot of notes, and this can be quite daunting when you start learning this piece, as is the case with a lot of other pieces. We're doing Schubert variations next, in the next question, and that also has a lot of notes, and so some of this will apply to that as well. So the first thing I like to do is find the outline of the music. So we just get the bare structure, and that helps us find out how we phrase, where we want to go, and then where the phrase dies away from that point. So if we look at the first little section of the Doppler, the structure would be, and you don't have to be too analytical or Schenkerian or something about it, but just think about what are your main notes in the melody. So take away all those extra ones. So just in the very first bar or two, we've got an A going to B flat. And then it rests again on the A. So we just have a slight phrase towards the B flat. So that's, we use those little notes. And then he puts in a couple more acciacaturas, just to re-emphasize that and add a little bit more spice to the melody. And then it uses those little notes back to the A. Okay, so if we think about how we're blowing through that, don't change how you're blowing when you do the structure to when you add notes. But from a technical point of view, when we need to actually really learn these notes and get them in our muscle memory, I would suggest, firstly, just to remember that the fingers should always stay very close to the keys and no heavy percussive hits of the keys, and that will encourage a nice legato. But really importantly is to practice slowly to build up muscle memory, but with your best sound at all times. So you're training in finding expression, and that doesn't mean vibrato or on every note, but it does mean real care and beauty of the sound for each note. And it gives you a chance to find out which notes are more important within these little quick passages. For example, the next bit, this little bit here, practice that slowly. Find that the C sharp is more important perhaps than the others. Okay, so practice that one slowly. So use the last 4 notes there as a pickup. And then we come away from that E, so don't get too soft too soon on there. And then we've got that 3 note descending there, so not each of those equal. And then we've got this long scale. And it's pianissimo, but don't neglect your airspeed. And let's practice it in little chunks. Etc. So you just move along 1 note at a time. Say have about 4 or 5 notes in one chunk, and you just move that chunk along. And then you find also the scale patterns in there. So a D minor scale, and then it goes into the melodic minor. So key points there is to find your outline, play beautifully and slowly, and then do some chunking, so moving your chunks along so your fingers have a chance to get used to those little patterns. And the last question for today comes from Lindsay, and she would like some tips on a particular passage in the 5th variation of Schubert's Theme and Variations on Trocknerblumen. So the 5th variation does look at the flute's agility, but always with a musical purpose. So we've got to practice these technical bits really musically as well, so they don't become disconnected. So I think the 3 main things would be to have a plan with the breathing, and in the second section it's usually after every bar or 2. You could snatch little ones in between the staccatos if you need to, but usually every bar should be enough. You've also got quite big intervals to practice, especially going up to G sharp. And also to find patterns in the technical passages. So they're based on scales, and sometimes it just deviates from a normal scale. So just to find how Schubert does that will help your fingers. And because there's a lot of notes, just to practice it in a very similar way to the Doppler, nice and slow, really beautiful sound, phrased, and finding the structure. So if I just go from the beginning of the variation and just go through how I practice it all, and hopefully you get some tips from that. So just looking at the first bar, we've got a decoration of E and G. And then he decorates it further. And then we've got an E minor arpeggio. So he's just filling that out with some passing notes. And that's all in E minor. And then the third bar, a little bit different there. We've got following the harmonic progression of the theme, going from G major then G minor. So that's the major bit, and then back to major, with just a little turn at the end there. So you find all these little tricks that he's doing. When we get to 173, all we have is a decorated B major arpeggio, and then E minor. So all he does is go below the B and above it. So that's quite easy to get the hang of. Just having a look at the structure, we find that the first beat and the second quaver beat belong to the same chord, and then similarly the third and the fourth quaver beats belong to the same chord. So we want to find a little bit of a stress and release there. So see if you can show that phrasing when you add all the notes. Just do it slowly. Okay, and that's like that for a bit. And then we've got the second section. So practicing the intervals in the second section will help those. Try the Moyes approach. Until you get up to C sharp. This little cascade around 185 is just a decorated E major arpeggio again. Then at 187 we've got octave jumps. First half of those where the higher note is louder than the lower note, and then he switches it around halfway through where the lower note should be louder, because we want to show this melody. So then just practice those octaves without the other two notes. And just do it in your own time, so you're not always thinking about having to do it in time. And then practice the three notes to help you get to the next note. And so where it switches into the lower note being louder, blow through that a little bit more. And then you've got another big cascade, basically just arpeggios again. So just decorated there. So once you have the patterns and all these technical bits under the fingers, make sure that you're feeding into that the musical expression to practice these bits with. And the character basically changes almost every line. So practice just the beginning of each line with the sort of sound that you want. So quite a strong colour at the beginning. Then it gets more major. And then we have this E minor bit. A little bit more floaty piano. And then it gets more. And then we have this laughter here. And then the a little bit more strident there. Then back to this floaty sound. And then happy. Then something a little bit more stern in the next bit. And then frantic. But with ease in the fingers, of course. And then bubbly octave jumps. Of course, finger coordination and getting it all right is important, but it's always working with the music. And actually, if you practice scales by varying them a lot, you can cover these patterns in your scale practice. So instead of just doing a normal E minor, you can do and then you're practicing that first line there. So I hope that helps, and let me know how you get on with that.